Mara Nguyen opened her small grocery before sunrise in Baywood Heights. The neighborhood was an aging suburb where storefronts changed hands often. She kept the lights low to save electricity during the winter months. Her father once ran a market overseas, and she inherited his habits. Mara tracked every carton of milk and each bruised apple carefully. The register tape was always stapled to a page in her ledger. Customers liked her quiet patience and her sharp memory for names. Her lease was month to month, which made planning feel like guessing. The landlord, Corwin Property Group, emailed reminders with polite legal language. Mara read those messages twice because the tone never matched the stakes. The building needed plumbing work, but repairs arrived only after repeated requests. She paid for a temporary fix herself and kept the receipt anyway. Her accountant friend said keeping paper mattered when power shifted suddenly. Mara smiled at that, though she felt uneasy hearing it aloud. A new bakery opened nearby and drew away foot traffic. She responded by stocking cheaper staples and offering simple weekly specials. On Sundays, she called her mother, who asked about safety first. Mara always said she was fine because worry traveled fast. One afternoon, an envelope arrived from the city compliance office. Inside was a notice about sidewalk clearance and an inspection deadline. The fine amount was listed, but the description felt strangely vague. Mara walked outside and measured the sidewalk with a tape measure. Her produce crate sat well within the painted boundary from last year. She took photos from several angles and saved them to a folder. A week later, an inspector arrived without calling, wearing a calm expression. He noted issues on a tablet and avoided her questions politely. When she asked for the exact violation, he cited a municipal code section. He offered no argument and no comfort, only a signature request. Mara did not sign, and the inspector simply documented her refusal. 2 days later, the fine posted online with added administrative fees. She paid it, because late penalties would wreck her cash flow. The next month, another notice arrived, this time for exterior signage. Her sign had not changed since opening, and the permit remained valid. She called the compliance office and waited on hold for 40 minutes. A clerk said the system showed a discrepancy and suggested she appeal. Mara filed the appeal online and attached photos, receipts, and the permit. The portal accepted her documents, but it gave no confirmation email. She printed screenshots anyway, because you learn caution in small business. Her friends told her to ignore it until the hearing date. Mara could not ignore it, because customers asked about the taped notice. Each explanation felt like a confession, even when she did nothing wrong. The landlord emailed again, praising compliance and mentioning curb appeal goals. Mara wondered why her building owner suddenly cared about her crates. She searched local news and found talk of a redevelopment corridor project. The plan promised new mixed-use buildings and higher property tax revenue. Her store sat exactly within the colored map boundary on a city PDF. Mara felt small reading that, like a pencil mark could erase her. She kept working, but the next inspection arrived sooner than expected. A second fine followed, and then a warning about possible suspension. At night, she reread the code section until the words blurred. The hearing date for her signage appeal was postponed without explanation. Mara received the postponement notice after the original date had passed. She called again and reached a different clerk with a sharper voice. That clerk said her appeal file showed as incomplete and therefore inactive. Mara insisted she submitted everything, and the clerk suggested resubmitting. When Mara asked what was missing, the clerk could not say. She resubmitted the same documents and saved new screenshots for proof. The portal later displayed an error message, claiming the upload failed. Mara drove to City Hall on a weekday, closing the store early. A security guard directed her to a window where paperwork moved slowly. The compliance receptionist accepted her documents and stamped a received date. Mara asked for a copy of the file, but the receptionist refused. She was told records were internal until a decision was issued. Back at the store, she found another notice taped crookedly to the door. This one cited trash enclosure standards and included photos she did not recognize. The photos showed a dumpster area from an angle behind her building. Mara walked behind the building and saw contractors working on a neighboring lot. Their debris spilled near her dumpster, but the lot had its own gate. She asked the foreman to keep the area clear, and he shrugged. He said the property group controlled access, and his job was timed. Mara emailed Corwin Property Group about the debris and attached photos. Their representative replied that tenant areas must remain compliant at all times. The message offered a preferred contractor list for cleanup services. Those services cost more than Mara earned in an average weekday morning. She cleaned the area herself after closing, wearing gloves and anger. 2 weeks later, the city assessed a repeat violation anyway. The fine letter included a line about escalating enforcement actions. Mara started logging every visit, every email, and every code citation. She bought a cheap binder and labeled it with the street address. A friend suggested hiring an attorney, but Mara could not afford one. Instead, she visited the public library and learned open records basics. The librarian showed her how to request inspection histories for her parcel. Mara submitted a public records request and paid a small processing fee. Weeks passed before an email arrived with a download link. The file contained inspection summaries, timestamps, and internally coded notes. Mara noticed multiple entries marked as complaint-driven rather than routine. The complainant field was redacted, which was legal and still frustrating. One note mentioned coordination with redevelopment outreach staff for corridor readiness. Mara reread that line and felt her stomach tighten into focus. She searched city council agendas and found a committee meeting about blight reduction. Corwin Property Group appeared on the speaker list as an interested stakeholder. The meeting minutes praised voluntary compliance and cited small businesses as obstacles. Mara imagined her store reduced to an obstacle in someone's slide deck. She attended the next committee meeting and sat near the back. A city staffer described a streamlined enforcement approach to improve corridor presentation. Corwin's representative nodded and spoke about partnering with tenants on improvements. Mara waited for public comment and introduced herself in a steady voice. She asked whether enforcement targeted certain parcels within the redevelopment boundary. The chair said enforcement was neutral and based on documented violations. Afterward, a staffer approached Mara and offered a brochure about facade grants. The brochure required matching funds and a landlord's signature for eligibility. Mara asked her landlord for the signature, and they suggested a lease increase first. They framed it as aligning rent with improving neighborhood value. Mara refused, and the representative replied that participation was optional. A week later, Corwin sent a notice of non-renewal effective in 60 days. The letter cited planned capital improvements and the need for vacant possession. Everything in the letter sounded reasonable, which made it harder to fight. Mara sat on a milk crate in the stockroom and stared. She considered moving, but nearby rents were higher and deposits were steep. Her suppliers offered credit only because she always paid on time. If she closed even briefly, her reputation with them would weaken. The city also sent a final notice demanding payment within 10 days. Mara paid again, then wrote down every transaction in her binder. She requested an administrative hearing for the trash enclosure violations. The hearing packet arrived with a checklist and a warning about strict deadlines. Mara complied exactly because precision was the only tool she owned. On hearing day, the officer appeared on video and spoke briskly. The city presented photos and claimed repeated non-compliance over several months. Mara presented her photos showing debris from contractors beyond her control. The hearing officer ruled the code imposed strict responsibility on tenants. Mara lost, and the ruling added another set of administrative costs. She walked outside and felt heat behind her eyes, but kept breathing. That night, she drafted a letter to the city ombuds office. She explained the pattern, the redevelopment notes, and the impossible responsibility standard. The ombuds office replied that they could review process fairness, not policy choices. Mara asked for help obtaining unredacted complaint sources, and they declined. Setbacks settled over her like dust on canned goods. She considered giving up, but the non-renewal date kept approaching. Mara visited other tenants along the corridor and listened carefully. A barber reported similar fines after refusing to remodel at his expense. A laundromat owner showed warnings about signage and loitering controls. None of them claimed a conspiracy, but all felt pressured to leave. Mara asked whether anyone had requested records, and most had not. She offered to share her request template, and they exchanged numbers. Together, they compiled a timeline of inspections along the same few blocks. The pattern showed spikes after redevelopment meetings and before lease deadlines. Mara submitted another records request for communications about corridor readiness. This time, the city charged a larger fee due to extensive search time. She paid from her savings, feeling the money leave like air. When the records arrived, many emails were heavily redacted for privilege. Still, one message thread included a subject line about tenant compliance leverage. The body text described using strict enforcement to encourage voluntary relocation. No one ordered illegal action, but the intent was plain. Mara felt cold reading it, and you would too. She forwarded the thread to a local small-town journalist she barely knew. The journalist requested verification, so Mara provided the download metadata. He also asked other tenants for their records to corroborate the pattern. Corwin Property Group learned about inquiries and sent Mara a cordial letter. They offered to waive 1 month of rent if she left quietly early. The offer sounded generous until she calculated moving costs and lost inventory. Mara declined and asked instead for relocation assistance and a longer timeline. Corwin responded that they could not set a precedent for other tenants. Meanwhile, the city issued a new warning about possible business license suspension. Mara contacted a legal aid clinic and waited 2 weeks for intake. A volunteer attorney reviewed her binder and said the process looked weaponized. The attorney explained that strict liability codes can be lawful yet abusive. They recommended seeking a temporary injunction against license suspension during appeal. Mara gathered sworn statements from neighboring tenants about contracted debris and access. She also obtained an inspector testimony excerpt from a prior council workshop video. In that excerpt, an inspector described focusing on targeted corridors for visible impact. The attorney filed an emergency motion, citing unequal enforcement and due process concerns. The first judge denied immediate relief, saying administrative remedies were not exhausted. It was a second setback, and Mara nearly stopped answering the phone. The attorney urged her to keep documenting and pursue a higher administrative review. Mara filed for review and included the leverage email thread as new evidence. The review board scheduled a hearing and required the city to respond formally. Days before the hearing, the journalist published a detailed story with documents. The article avoided accusations, but it highlighted the relocation intent clearly. Public comments flooded the council inbox, demanding transparent enforcement guidelines. At the hearing, the city attorney argued the emails reflected policy discussion, not directives. Mara testified calmly about paying fines, losing hours, and facing non-renewal pressure. She presented photos showing contractor debris and emails showing landlord control of access. The board questioned why complaint-driven inspections clustered around redevelopment milestones. A supervisor admitted corridor readiness was a performance metric for the unit. That admission was not illegal, but it made selective pressure easier. The board ruled Mara's trash violations should be dismissed due to shared area ambiguity. They ordered refunds of related fines and waived accumulated administrative fees. They also suspended further enforcement until clearer guidance was issued citywide. Mara felt her shoulders loosen, and you could see it in her stance. Corwin Property Group still ended the lease, but the timeline was extended 90 days. The extension came through a mediated agreement prompted by the public scrutiny. Corwin also paid a modest relocation stipend without admitting wrongdoing. With time and money, Mara found a smaller storefront outside the corridor boundary. She transferred her permit and reopened after only 4 closed days. The City Council later adopted written standards limiting strict liability for shared enclosures. They required documented notice to landlords before citing tenants for third-party debris. The journalist followed up, naming no private complainants, but showing the reform details. Mara kept her binder on a shelf, not as a trophy. It reminded her that polite language can still corner people. Some customers traveled to her new location, saying they respected her steadiness. Others were lost to convenience, and she accepted that without pretending. On quiet mornings, she checked the corridor news and saw fewer sudden fines. Mara knew the system would never feel gentle, only more accountable. She stocked fresh fruit, greeted regulars, and kept every receipt in order.